Welcome to Seldom is Heard, a forum where folks at Thrive Kansas want to highlight the voices and issues that are seldom heard in the State House. Yet they should guide how we build our future in the Sunflower State. Today we're talking to a few Kansas leaders about their work around statewide paid family medical leave and how it could impact Kansans and what's stopping it from becoming a reality. Now it's time to have our guests introduce themselves. What brought you here today, and can you briefly describe your job / how long you've been there?
So I'm Brenda Bandy. I'm the Executive Director of Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition, which has been around for about 15 years. But I say I started my job the day I had my first kid. So that's actually when my job started. And I'm from Manhattan, so I drove in from there today.
Hi, good afternoon. I am Katie Markham. I am a full-time mom of 3 children and a full-time compensation and benefits manager at Hutchinson Regional Healthcare System. So my oldest is 15 and my youngest is 9. And so my kids, they show a lot in what I do for work. So with compensation and benefits, it's important to have my experiences roll over and encourage businesses to do better by all parents.
Yeah.
And my name is Logan Stensing. I'm a policy coordinator at Thrive Kansas, and I work on our advocacy coalition campaigns aimed at investing in early childhood, trying to make sure our communities have quality childcare, that workforce is supported, making sure folks and families are, in all sense of the words, thriving. And so that's what brought us to paid family leave as a policy to champion because of its potential to really help unlock that for Kansans across the spectrum of work and across communities from urban to rural.
And I'm Pempa Moyo, the other policy coordinator at Thrive Kansas, and I will be moderating this discussion today. So with our first question, let's start with, why do you value your family?
Well, I guess my kids should be answering that, right? Let's see what they have to say about that. So first of all, I want to say thank you for hosting this conversation. So, and an opportunity to talk about paid leave. For me, family has always meant from the very beginning a sense of being a part of a community and making our family contribute to the larger society. And now as my children are young adults and they're entering the workforce, things that I just took for granted back when I was raising children, I understand for them, they can't take for granted. And when I ask all 4 of them, now ages 23 to 29, starting their careers, what would they do if they had children now? The answers are so different among all 4 of them. Some of them have very generous paid leave programs, like Hutch does. And others are like, well, I guess I would just have to see how much vacation time I have, and what my partner had. And it seems like such a random thing. And yeah, so that's kind of gotten me to thinking about my own family and what it means for my grandchildren.
I think for me, like I said, I want to make sure, my kids are still young. My oldest is 15, my youngest is 9. And I think it's important to make society better for them. It wasn't great 15 years ago, having my first kiddo. Really, paid leave was non-existent. And so what I'm trying to do is just make it better for my kiddos, my grandkids. I say all the time, I want paid leave to be so normal that they don't know why we're making a big deal about it today. They're gonna go, why did you make a big deal about it? Why did you even need to go on a podcast? Because it's normal, And so that's what I want for my kids, my grandkids, is that it just becomes a normal everyday thing. And I tell our new team members at Hutch Regional, when I'm doing orientation, I tell them I want you to go find employers. If you leave Hutch Regional, I want you to be picky about where you go. Yeah. I want you to just expect these things. And we're not perfect, of course. We are far from perfect, but I want us to start being picky about the places that we work, about the places that we spend our time and energy on. So
Yeah.
this is that
And Katie,
support
that
for-
reminds me that a lot of this is being driven by what employees want.
Mm-hmm.
My children are now asking those questions, when they're in the interview stage. And so you're educating future employees about what to look for and what to expect. So
Absolutely.
those of you who are listening to this podcast in 2050, you're wondering what the whole paid leave deal was about. You
Yes.
heard it from Katie first.
Yeah.
Well, and so much, I mean, I think a lot of people put this expectation that, oh, if I get a really good high paying job, paid leave will be a part of that. Yet, that some of the national stats, it shows that 94% of the lowest income workers do not have paid leave. But the highest wage earners in our country, only 52%. Only half of them have paid leave. So I think this idea that, if I work hard enough, I put the time in and climb the career ladder, I can get access to this program is not a reality. But for me, and why do I value family? Oh goodness, I think of all of the times in which family has been there for me, from as early as I mean, so much of why I'm here today is a manifestation of the love, the stability they provided in every moment of my life. And I think about, okay, well, they were able to be there for me. How many families can't? So it's that idea of that I value the presence of family and love, and really you only tap into that when you're able to have time together.
Wow, well said. Yeah.
All of you touched on the importance of families in like a variety of ways, right? Like being able to take time and raise your kids. Logan talking about how his family was able to sacrifice so much for him. When was there a time where you or your family have been in a time of need, and what was that circumstance, right? Like, were you able to financially afford to take the time you needed to care for your family, not just if you gave birth or were with your partner as they were recovering? And how would paid family medical leave have benefited that circumstance when you didn't have it at the time?
Well, so for me, I would say, thankfully, we've been fortunate that we haven't had a family emergency where there's been a need, unexpected need. But I can tell you that our family benefited from the military approach to paid leave. My husband was active duty in the military when we had our 4 children. And that stability allowed for me to be able to stay home during those early years, and the fact that we had provide health care for all of the kids through that system provided stability. The fact he was able to take time off of work with the birth of each of those children, I think we could learn a lot. And I know that since we've had children, the military has expanded their paid leave for all military members from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. And there's been an interesting report that's shown how that has impacted their recruitment and retention of people in the military. So we benefited from that system, and thankfully we haven't had an emergency yet to test the system. So,
Yeah, I had a very different experience. I haven't always had the luxury of working for employers that even were covered under FMLA protection. And so when my oldest was born, I went to work 2 weeks later. So, sorry.
Oh, that's...
So 2 weeks after he was born, I was back to work. Sorry, thank you.
Yeah.
I knew I was gonna say that. I knew I was gonna cry, but I was trying not to.
Still right here.
Yeah,
It
and so
is,
that's
yeah.
a lot of what I do now. Is like I
Yeah.
don't want that for anybody else because it was
No.
horrible. So he and I have a wonderful relationship. I mean, it hasn't ruined. Our
Yeah.
relationship, of course. So he's a wonderful young man. But there was a lot of time that I missed, and
Yeah.
so, not only I had to go back to work 2 weeks later. My husband's employer was calling him. I think it was probably the next day after our oldest was born, asking when he was going to be back to work. I mean, so like I said, 15 years ago, that wasn't like decades and decades ago. It was only 15 years ago, and we had employers who didn't support us. So neither my spouse or I had employers that supported us. And fast forward to when our daughter was born. So she's 9. And a few months after she was born, she was diagnosed with RSV. at the same time, my husband was diagnosed with cancer. And so, like, we had two major things happen. And I didn't have time off of work. And so I worked, and then I I was spending time in the hospital with my daughter one morning, and then that evening, or that, later that day, was traveling to be with my husband with his surgery. I mean, it was like a whole thing all at once while work didn't stop. I mean, and as the primary breadwinner of the house, like, I had to work. If I didn't work, then we didn't pay the bills. So anyway, I will purposely never work at a company that doesn't offer FMLA, and because of those reasons. But now, like I said a minute ago, I want to find employers that offer more than just what that basic, what we consider basic right now, but not all employers offer it, because not everybody has to. But yeah, I want to be picky about where I work, and I want my kiddos and the people around me to be picky about where they work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think, oh my goodness, and that was 15 years ago, and I just think, I mean, I heard those, I felt those emotions.
Yeah.
You did the very best you could with what you had, and yet it still tugs at your heartstrings today.
It does. Yeah.
That is just so. It's not okay.
And it's not a unique story.
No.
And that's the why we're here. And I think for me and my family, because I'm only 26, so there haven't been, I think, as a young adult, I've been growing, and I'm also an only child. And so, as I've been growing up, thinking about having children, or even thinking about my parents as they age, there's this question of, like, will I be able to be there for them? And, I think looking back at my own story of when I was born, my mom was an editor and owner of a local newspaper in Marion County, and she cared so much about being there for me, and because they had tried for years to have me and had struggled, and so when she finally did, she decided to sell the newspaper to just totally, and this was her life's dream. This was the thing that, and she was in her low 30s in a rural town in the 90s doing that, which is, again, a testament to herself. Yeah. But for her to sell that paper, to sacrifice that for me, and essentially what's very interesting is the fact that she was an entrepreneur, she was a business owner, because she had been paying into unemployment insurance. When she sold the newspaper, she got to take unemployment. That functionally was paid leave.
Right.
It shouldn't be the structure for how we have it. People, women should not have to sell their businesses. Right. But this idea that paid leave is, this program, if you have it at a statewide level, it can support those small entrepreneurs, those small business owners, to the larger corporations as well. Right. So I think I look back at that as a decision that I don't believe my mother should ever have had to have made. No. She has now never entered back into that same field, because, again, it's just been so long, and as work and trajectories change, one decision like that can have a massive impact on your personal aspirations as well as your financial security. Right. Because I think about the last story I'll share is my father. My grandpa passed away 2 years ago, and he was a Vietnam veteran, had Agent Orange exposure, so he had a lot of ailments that were derived from that. In his last year, my dad quit his job, and was taking care of my grandpa. And my dad, luckily enough, had just saved up enough money to where he could try to do that, but my dad's also in a position where he doesn't have a retirement, so he could maybe take that sacrifice and be there for our family when they needed it. And I am just so forever grateful that my dad got that time with his dad, because of how, I won't dive into all that, but yes, it was very precious time. And just the idea that my dad had to make that sacrifice, now his future and who's caring for him is in question. So I think there's just those stories, and every family, I think, has those examples of maybe you made it work or you did it or you couldn't, but no matter what, it all illustrates There's costs even when we make those sacrifices. When hey, maybe there's a smarter way to do this that lifts all tides.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you both mentioned the cost and how difficult the decision, and your dad modeling that decision to make to basically use his retirement to take care of his dad. And now you as an HR professional are able to make this possible for the Hutch Regional employees for that. I think we all have become advocates, but through a different door, because we've seen how important this is. And I know I've heard from family members who have basically paid family leave through their credit card. You know, they have put a lot of their household expenses on that credit card and are now facing, you know, coming out from underneath that mountain of debt. So I think there is, you know, like you said, everybody uses whatever resources they have to make this work, and it shouldn't be on the backs of credit cards or retirement plans or having to go back to work 2 weeks later.
Selling your business.
Yeah, selling your
absolutely.
business.
That should never.
Yeah.
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 I know when my mom wanted me, mom's a planner like I am, so she was like, I want to get pregnant. She got married at 26, and she's like, I'm getting pregnant at 27. So she saved up all of her leave, every ounce of her leave that she could accumulate. And then mind you, she wasn't in the States. I wasn't born in the States. I was born in Malawi. So she was able to take 6 months off with me. But at that time, she had me, and then her mom passed away shortly. So then she also had to take care of her younger siblings who were in school. So she didn't have that support. She had a husband who was working, but she also had a 6 months old and then like 2 teenagers to raise in that. Like, she was a brand new nurse. And so I think of her, and I think paid family leave, not just for people in the States, but like for this to be a global phenomenon, right? Because life happens and you need that time to recuperate and recover, and also just to spend with family, even if it's not a negative life event.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
For sure.
And I think back to you having, I mean, your situation of, you know, her having to juggle the loss of her own mother, and then yours with your husband getting cancer at the same time.
Right.
You can't plan for that.
No. No.
You can't.
No.
Yeah. Wow. That's rough.
Hopefully to steer us in a lighter direction. Sometimes when people are introduced to the topic or the concept of paid family medical leave, they can assume it's just maternity leave or paternity leave plus. Can you explain how paid family medical leave differs from parental leave and why that difference matters?
Well, I think you said that right now Hutch is offering paid parental leave.
Yes.
So maybe we could start there. And
sure.
that means,
Yeah.
what does that mean?
So the paid parental leave at Hutch Regional covers birth or adoption, and it covers up to 2 parents. So if 2 parents are working for the healthcare system, both of them would get the same amount of leave. And like I said, birth and adoption, but we also have FMLA, or family medical leave. But that one, while it guarantees your job while you're out of work, it doesn't guarantee a paycheck. So that's the difference. That's why we wanted the paid parental leave, is so that it can continue that paycheck. So you get 100% of your wages for 6 weeks while you're out on either birth or adoption leave. And this is both parents, so we don't. It doesn't matter whether you're the birthing parent or not the birthing parent. It doesn't matter if the parents are married, or you can. We're not doing any of that. So it's 2 parents, and it doesn't matter whether, like I said, whether you're the birthing parent or not.
So a very broad definition of family.
Yes.
And the arrival of the child can come different ways.
Yes, and we
So, nice.
absolutely, and we had
Yeah.
talked about that. We had talked about, do we define family in the policy? And it's like, absolutely not. Like, we can't define. So it says that you need to be, like, if you identify as the parent, then you would qualify for this leave. And we're not going to tell you what a parent means. We're not going to tell you how to define that. And so if we've got, because some families might have more than 2 parents, some families might have less than 2 parents, but we set our policy to limit it at 2.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing and so needed that we have this broad definition of family. And I think, back to your question, Pempo, then what is paid family and medical leave? Like, how does it build on this? So it starts with that. I mean, that's definitely, parental leave is a part of it. But it is bigger than that, because it allows for caregiving of other family members. And the policy would get into the definition of what that might be. But to your point, Logan, it would be maybe caring for your father or your mother or maybe your spouse who may have a long-term need, such as someone who's recovering from cancer. So it allows you to be a caregiver for not only a newborn child, but other immediate family members in need of caregiving at the same time. So that's the family piece of it. The medical leave is allow you to take medical leave for your own personal medical leave beyond just normal sick days. So this would not be, I've got a cold, I'm taking medical leave. It would be, I've got cancer and I'm taking medical leave. So if you have a serious illness, medical leave, and actually other states that have implemented paid family and medical leave have found the majority of the applications have been for the individual to take their own medical leave. And so think about what it would mean if you had employees that were able to continue to remain in the workforce, but while they were able to get cancer treatment or something like that. So it's both caring for other family members and your own personal medical needs.
And I think a beautiful description, and I think one way to also look at it as pretty much for every worker that pays into, a statewide paid family and medical leave program, there's an instance where you could utilize this for you and yourself or your family. I think speaking of broad definitions of family, many of the states that have passed paid family leave have included a very broad definition of family because there's this idea that if you are paying into a program that you can only use a limited amount of time, like we're not giving infinite leave, it kind of recharges, right, per each use. If you're using that for someone that's in your life that you care about, they are your family. Right. And if they aren't, then hey, you used that time up. And so that's one of the things that I believe is so useful about the policy is that it is so adaptable, and we need adaptable when it comes to family, because so many of our families and the challenges we face are unique. They're not totally unique to us, but there's many variations it can take. And so trying to create a policy and a program that truly thinks about not only, there are folks in my age range who don't even know if they want to have children because of even all the things you mentioned earlier, right? Of the economics of it, the social challenges we're kind of facing. So this idea that we can create a policy and a program that people can see themselves in and see the use of like, hey, I could use this to support myself if I were going through a medical challenge. I believe my neighbor also deserves that right. I'm kind of sad to see the amount of GoFundMes on social media when individuals are going through these crises, and a huge part of that GoFundMe is because paid leave doesn't exist.
Right. Because they've lost their income.
They've lost their income.
Yeah.
And so, are we tired of seeing that? Are you frustrated when you have seen that on your own social media and feel like there needs to be a better way?
Yeah, and I think you just mentioned earlier before we started the podcast was that there's a declining birth rate in Kansas.
Kansas
for the second year in a row.
Multiple years in a row.
So what you said is proving out in the numbers. People are finding it more and more difficult to have or expand their families. And I think about what your CEO said. You want to share that?
No, absolutely. So when we were discussing paid parental leave and looking at all of our benefits, one thing he keeps saying is, we want to solve the question, I would have another baby, but, and then what is after the but? So what is stopping our team members from having another baby? I would have another baby, but I don't have enough leave. I would have another baby, but I don't have childcare. I would have another baby, but I don't have transportation, and I don't have good housing, or whatever that is. We want to figure out what those barriers are to our team members having more children, because that's the future.
Yeah. It is. Yeah.
And so,
But I mean, just from both a cultural standpoint and an economic standpoint and all of that. But I can tell you that as generous and as broad of a definition of family as we would like to see, and the ability to take leave for both family caregiving and medical leave, this is some of the things that makes businesses nervous. Right? Because what we've heard from businesses, especially small businesses, is, oh my goodness, everybody's going to be gone all the time, right? Who's
Right.
going to
Right.
be here? We're going to be
Right.
running on a skeleton crew
Right.
because people are going to be gone for this and that and the other thing, and they're worried about the impact that this paid leave is going to have on their ability to do business, which is valid, and to, you know, thinking about your business, and we want businesses to thrive. I think that the good news is we can look at other states that have implemented this. There are 16 other states that have done this, and they have not seen business closures. They haven't seen difficulty with businesses being able to keep their doors open and do business. So the worst case worries haven't actually come to fruition. And so we can look at them. We also know that having paid leave doesn't create the need for leave. It doesn't create cancer. It doesn't
Right.
create
Right.
usually people having more and more children. It allows people to have an economic support for when those things come up. So what's currently happening is people are taking leave anyway, right? And 40% of people do not come back from maternity leave. Why? Because they don't know that there's not that bridge, right? They've left the workforce and they don't come back. So we know that paid leave is actually a boon for businesses and not a detriment, because people are taking leave anyway. They're just either leaving the workforce to do it, or they're taking all their vacation and sick days to do it. So it doesn't create a need for leave. It just helps people to bridge it when there is a time for need for leave.
Well, and I think on the business case question, there's also a lot of misunderstandings about paid leave or assumptions, because so many of them have thought about passing paid leave as maybe an internal company policy, and the idea of funding that is exorbitant. You know, it is very costly, especially for a small business, to consider passing a paid. Excuse me. It's very costly for a business, especially a small one, to even consider it. So it becomes a non-option. And I believe that's what's so exciting about a program like this, that creates a pooled contribution system that really enables so many businesses that value their employees, that don't want to lose those really talented workers, which is especially a challenge for Kansas, because we are a net out migration state. You know, we have most of our folks in the best prime of their working life are leaving our state, and the areas that do, where they come back, maybe they are in those higher wage jobs that do offer leave. But again, we even are aware that a lot of those companies aren't able to as well. So I think there's that worker-centered challenge there that companies really are putting at the forefront, and they know it's a priority. I can think of childcare as well, but they don't have the resources or the tools to solve that problem by themselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And so we gotta help them out. And this is a policy that not only helps workers but helps those employers as well.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Hutch Regional, you're paying for this benefit yourself.
Yeah, we
Wow.
are.
So
We
that's
are.
an economic commitment. You've made a commitment to pay for that out of pocket. And you have how many employees? Over 500?
We've got 1,400.
For 1,400.
Yes.
Okay, so we'd
Yes.
put you up there in like the mid to
Yes.
large size.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's an economy of scale, but I think about where it's still a financial commitment from you.
Absolutely.
And I've talked to a small business owner that had a gym. He spoke at our summit in January, and he was sharing that he only has like maybe 20 employees. They're all women, and several went out on maternity leave while they were working for him, and he personally paid their wages during the time they were gone. And he said, I just can't keep doing that.
Yeah.
You know, he wants to do the right thing, like you were saying, Logan. You know, he understands the need to keep those valuable employees. But boy, what hardship that is for a business owner to have to pay it out of pocket. So how nice would it be, like you said, if we all pooled it together, and then it wouldn't matter whether your employee was even still with Hutch or still with the gym, that had gone to a new employer. They're still able to apply to that pool of funds that they have paid into. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's interesting you say that, because I think when I view paid family leave, it feels like it's a policy that has so much of our heart in it and our values, because so many of us as Kansans deeply value our families and being there for them, and we value other people being with their families. And I can name so many other, I think even my mom, when she was an entrepreneur, business owner, she talked about paying for paid leave for her staff, and it coming out of pocket as well. And there's this beautiful balance we could achieve where we could live out our values and what we want to do and how we want to stand by other families and do it in a smart way that is actually economically beneficial to everybody. Right. It's good for businesses, good for workers, where right now, because it's so individual based, and it's all the responsibility. If you want to stand up for that value of I want workers to be with their families, you're pretty much standing up for that value.
That's what Hutch Regional
by
did.
yourself,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. They said we're going to do this,
Exactly.
and then it goes back to the luck of the draw.
Right.
But one of the things we haven't talked about, we talk about how this is great for families, how it's also good for employers, but from a population standpoint, I know that the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition, the reason that we first have interest in this is it increases breastfeeding rates. I think about all of the things that our organization cares about, moms and babies, and helping families get off to a good start, like Thrive does as well, could really be addressed by paid leave. We know that not only does it increase breastfeeding rates, it decreases infant mortality, maternal mortality, also maternal depression, and the mental health and we know that is increasing under our current stresses in our community. Maternal mental health is on the increase. You probably hear about that at the hospital, when moms are having babies. This policy helps to relieve that pressure for new families, which would address a lot of policy levers. It increases the uptake of immunizations. Why? Because parents have time to take their children in to get those well baby checks. They don't have to take time off work. So all the things that we know are good for families from a health and mental health perspective, this really helps to address. And so I think we can think about it from a population health perspective as well as the individual and the business perspective too.
I totally agree. And I think just naming a few populations, one that I believe is of a major priority to legislators as well as community members is substance abuse and recovery. Yes. Right now in our state, we know the statistics on overdose and how we have communities that are struggling with addiction and lacking any type of there have been moves or investments to try to really build up a system that has never existed to support those individuals, but so much of their ability to use those services that we're creating community, to take time for yourself to, you're losing a paycheck. Yeah. You're losing, and then that brings up a whole other questions of what you're going to have to sacrifice while you're in the throes of an active addiction. And so the idea that we could have a policy and program that individuals could take that protects them in that space, that doesn't make them feel, hey, because I think a lot of folks in addiction already deal with shame. They struggle with this feeling that they are hurting their loved ones, the people around them. So the idea that they would further do that because then they cannot economically provide to them because they can't take care of themselves, just get them back to a place of active recovery. That is for us, and in Allen County, through Thrive Allen County, we have a recovery resource house. And there have been challenges with the funding of that program and the continuation of it, but it exemplifies that need of, we have folks that lose their jobs totally. That is the most common result of if you have an addressing of addiction and you're like, hey, I got to wrestle with this, you're most likely losing all forms of employment you had. And you are starting from the ground up. And we don't believe that should be the case. And I would say another population specific to Kansas that paid family leave really gets at the source of is our aging population. We have so many of our communities where our elders are getting to that age where they're having to rely potentially on our nursing home systems, which has also had of recent news. There have been issues and challenges with staffing those places adequately and making sure the staff is quality and well compensated. Another area where if paid family leave existed, there could be another window of support that family could be there for them.
And I know most people would rather be cared for in their home than to go to a nursing home. And this would allow for family members to come in. I mean, I would love for my kids to be able to come in and stay with me, you know, and when the time needs, you know, to be able to have that option. But I know a personal friend who was a school teacher for 20 some years, a middle school teacher. Her mother got cancer. She quit to be able to go and take care of her mom. Now she's gone back now that her mom thankfully is in remission and is able to be a substitute teacher. But that school district lost a seasoned teacher who stepped away for several years. And think if she would have been able to take a few days, a week here, a week there, and still been able to be attached to the school district. And I'm sure your hospital will have the same benefits, you know, where people are able to still be connected to you to do that. I know one of the things we haven't touched on, but you mentioned earlier, Logan, was childcare. And you also talked about I'd have another baby, but childcare. And we know that Kansas isn't unique, that infant spots are hard to find, right? Like near impossible. So wouldn't paid leave allowing the parent to be the caregiver for 12 to 20 weeks or whatever we can imagine, right, would relieve the pressure for infant care? Right. And then I also heard from a child care provider director for a large center in Topeka that a local employer changed their parental leave from 6 weeks to 12 weeks. And she noticed when the babies came in at 12 weeks, the parents were more rested, breastfeeding was established, the baby was happier and more organized. Everybody was at a better place at 12 weeks than 6 weeks. I can't imagine 2 weeks.
Yeah.
I can't imagine. That is just crazy. And very, very difficult. So I think this is part of a solution for childcare. What do you guys think about that?
Absolutely. Our policy, like I said, it gives 6 weeks to up to 2 parents, and we don't define when that leave starts. The parents get to tell us. So one parent could take 6 weeks, and the next parent could pick up the next 6 weeks, and so that could be their choice. And so while we want to offer 12, it was only in the budget to do 6 for now. But that's one way that we could extend, as you said. I mean, delay when that kiddo needs to start daycare by offering those types of leaves.
Well, and there's so many childcare and early childhood education programs across the state that don't even offer infant care slots because infant care is more expensive, and early childhood education is already very underfunded. And when a program is trying to figure out, a child care program is trying to figure out their bottom line and how do we bring in enough money. I mean, and when you talk to child care providers, it is heartbreaking because you're talking to staff and to folks who dedicate their life to loving babies. So them having to tell parents that I can't care for your child, yet then the parent is in the situation where I have to go back to work, within a week or two. And we are putting parents between a rock and a very, very hard place when we do not offer paid leave and there's no infant care slots, but you got to go back to work. And so,
you end up with friends, families, neighbors, all pitching in, and this patchwork approach to childcare.
Or unlicensed, I think a lot of times it'll turn into whatever they need to do. And, there are many providers who have spent years going to school, learning, developing a skill and a craft that is not only for the development of those children, but it's protecting them. And children, but when they are the most vulnerable time in a human's life is when they are 1 year old. And so, or 1 year, sorry, not plural. And so that is such a critical time, and the idea that we could have a program that, helps and enables parents to be there so that they can be there during that critical time for development, as you were saying about how, those kiddos, when they come into class, when they are, when they're still babibies, but they're not as preemie new. They're better. They're more developed. They're not, and especially for childcare folks, if you have one child that has some behavioral issues, developmental delays, that changes the scheme of the entire program. Sometimes, because you may be understaffed, you have to put your attention way more on that one child than the other, which again affects the quality of care that all the children are receiving. So this is truly one of those root cause policies. I even think of another issue that we hear a lot in the state is around foster care and adoption. There have been numerous issues across our state of trying to address this challenge of how do we ensure that foster care placements are secure, that they start off to a great start, that those families bond. Having paid family leave would be an amazing option for those families so they don't have to feel like a kiddo who has gone through immense hardship potentially, unknowable challenges and trauma, to give them the time to just build like a loving relationship and just focus on that. Focus on that. Like I think we all care about that, but right now it doesn't seem like we prioritize it.
And I wonder, barring Hutch Regional allowing parental leave in the case of adoption, I've never dug into, but I'm curious how many employers who do offer paid leave, which we know, like you said earlier, is still the minority. How many of even those few offer adoption, paid leave in the event of adoption?
Or foster.
Or foster, yeah.
The
Probably not
population
many.
gets smaller and smaller.
and smaller.
Yeah.
I know for our largest private employers in the state of Kansas, most of them that do offer paid family leave offer it as parental leave, and that covers adoption, but it doesn't cover fostering. And so that does speak to, again, depending on who your employer is, you're at the mercy of how they define family, which is very concerning, right? Because if you have a very rigid family structure, you should not be punished if you don't fit into that definition.
Yeah. And I know we talked earlier that you're a member of SHRM, the Kansas Society for Human Resource Management, and they do an employee benefits survey every year, and looking at the Kansas responses. So this is for employers like yours that are a part of SHRM, that the vast majority of employees in Kansas don't have access to paid leave, like you were saying earlier. But it's also an equity issue, because it's the low wage earners that don't have access, kind of what you were saying also, but it's also the small businesses, which are the vast majority of businesses in Kansas, don't offer paid leave for all the economic reasons, because they can't afford to offer it. So I think this could go a long way in addressing equity in our state and the health equity if everyone were able to take paid leave for all the reasons that we were just talking about, and not just the select few that are in the upper income bracket.
Speaking of these select communities, right, whether you're a woman or you're marginalized in some aspects, I think sometimes when we talk about marginalization, we put it into like black or white, right? Like woman or man, but also we need to think about in terms of geography, right? When you're in places like Topeka or Wichita or Kansas City, you're more likely to find that high paying job that allows you maybe even to do remote work, right? If like you have remote work paired with this, your situation gets better. But what would be the argument for rural communities to be supportive of paid family medical leave if it's something that you think is more allocated to city folk?
Yeah. I think about when you say rural, I think, Thrive Kansas is the expert on rural, so I don't know that I am the one to answer that, so I definitely want to make sure that Logan has time to address that question about rural. I think about rural, I think of it being predominantly small employers, and I go back to what we talked about earlier, that the economics just don't make sense for them to be able to afford to offer paid leave like employers like Hutch Regional do. So that's what I'm thinking about, is the economics, which then make it difficult for families to choose to live in a rural area where the majority of those employers aren't going to be able to offer them paid leave.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Hey, I would echo what you said. I think the primary issue right now is that paid leave is on the backs of individual employers. So it really does depend on how much resources does that employer have, and their values as an employer. And unfortunately, even when we have larger employers in our rural communities, they're often national shareholder, publicly traded organizations that you don't have a human you can talk to who can be like, hey,
You don't have
dude,
a Katie?
exactly. We don't
When you need paid
have
leave?
we don't have that person that like,
Yeah.
oh, I see your pain, I feel it. That you're a local that cares about locals. Sometimes those big companies, they're like, hey, we'll send up your request up the ladder, and it'll go invisibly into the emails of someone who probably will never respond. And so there's that idea from the rural perspective of the challenges with the small or the employers being able to fund it. But I would also say when talking about the issue of out-migration, that is an issue that is primarily hitting our rural communities. And this idea that they are not places that we want to stay or raise our family, which is not true. There are so many individuals, so many Kansans that want to stay in their community. And actually, there are trends where we have, folks maybe in their 30s to 40s who are moving back to Kansas. They're coming back to the home on the range.
Do you hear that, kids? My
Right.
adult kids, please come back. They're all out of state. Please come
Right.
back for the
Right.
reasons Logan just
Right.
said.
And there's those values, and I think a lot of what we think about within Thrive Kansas and our rural communities helping them thrive is this idea that there are so many folks who were born in Kansas that moved away, that if we really felt like this was a place that was supportive in families and of starting anew, compared to a lot of other states, man, that looks lucrative. That's appealing. And so this idea, I think for us with our rural communities is that how do we champion policies that champion people and what they want and what they need to thrive. And paid family leave is one of those kind of silver bullet programs that just really creates a safety net for workers to depend on in those times of need. And especially I think if we mentioned childcare, we mentioned elderly, we mentioned substance abuse, those are all challenges that are very, very stark in our rural communities, and they are plaguing us, and we don't have adequate tools to really address it. And exactly, so
Could be one of. And I joked earlier about my adult kids coming back, but it's real. Because my kids, I think about a little, N of 4. Out of the 4, 3 work remotely. They could work anywhere in the world that they choose to. And I know 2 of them that are thinking about starting a family have actually researched what states are most family friendly to begin and they have an awareness of what states are going to be most supportive. And they have chosen to live in those states. And so we need to make Kansas one of those states, not just for my 4, but I'm thinking that, it's one of those examples that especially with remote work, we have a huge percentage of workers that are remote and they're able to choose where they're going to start a family. And we want Kansas to be one of those places.
Well, and I think an interesting angle to take on this as well, I feel we do a lot of community conversations with children, with high school students. We're asking them about the future of rural. What could keep you back? What could keep you in this community? What could welcome you back? And often, from the perspective of a lot of young people, they're like, I want more stuff to do. I want maybe a Chick-fil-A. Maybe, obviously we always try to build them up in what aspirations they have for community. But that's honestly some of the things that they think about. There are small businesses. We want more things to do. And I think if you really want to get to the root of some of why those small businesses don't succeed, or why do they struggle to get sprang up in the first place, it may be because we don't have the best supports for new entrepreneurs to start up. And not just from hey, here's a business loan to get your program started up, but when you talk to most employers nowadays, they talk about workforce. They talk about workforce challenges. Oh, we can't get folks to work nowadays. We struggle to find that quality staff person that stays with us. And so I think it's an interesting idea in the sense that, we can talk about all day long about how paid family leave helps families. It does in numerous instances, but it's the consequences of that, and what else could that spur. And if folks could really set their roots down in Kansas and feel like, okay, I can be here, and I know Kansas is going to have my back, and whatever employer I work for, that's a testament. And I think that could have a truly big effect on our who comes and who stays.
It does. Well, let's talk for a moment about economics, just flat out money, because you were talking about, I want to live in a community with like a Chick-fil-A or that has all these great. So how do we get businesses to come into these rural communities? It's workforce, but it also is an attractive economic climate for businesses. And I go back to what you said, Katie, that Hutch Regional made the decision to invest in paid family leave. So you're currently paying for it out of pocket, out of that. So how do you think that your company would feel if there were a state-run program? We talked earlier before we got started with the conversation. How is a paid leave program, a state-run program, funded? And it's self-funded through a payroll premium that either the employee, employer, or a combination of the two contribute into this dedicated fund. So if Hutch Regional Hospital contributed a portion of that, I'm wondering about the economics for you. Would you be like, wow, this is a huge cost savings to pay, like 0.2% of payroll or 0.1% of the payroll? Is there a point in which it would save you money?
I'm sure there are. I'm sure there would be a point. I can't speak to the, to that because
we don't know what the percentage.
We have a whole team that does the finances at the hospital, but I can't speak for the hospital as far as their willingness to participate. But I would be surprised if they wouldn't. So not only did we enact paid parental leave in July, starting January 1st in a couple of weeks, we're going to have free maternity care as well. So our team members having babies in our own hospital is going to cost them nothing.
Wow.
And so we did a but wait there's more type of type of benefit rollout, and it's just super exciting what we're doing for young families. And so I would be floored if they wouldn't be excited about something like this as well.
So when you all are paying for the program right now, you're administering it yourself.
We are.
So as the HR person, are you handling the applications then and handling the payments and all of that?
Yes. So the application is very similar to a family medical leave application or an FMLA application, and it's turned into the HR team. Basically, you have to work at the hospital or work at the healthcare system for a year, work 1,250 hours in the year, which is the same as FMLA guidelines, and you have to be classified as full-time or part-time. We have a fair number of PRN team members that aren't eligible. And that's it.
Wow.
So full-time or part-time and a year, and then 1,250 hours of work before your leave starts. And then it's basically, we code it in the system. We've got a payroll system that we use. We code it and let the system know that they're on this type of leave.
And away they go.
And they get paid for 6 weeks.
Wow,
So
that is wonderful.
Yeah.
So if there were a state-run equivalent of that, then all of that burden of the application and the payment would not be your staff to do. It would be like, hey, call this 1-800 number or go to this website and you fill out this application to be able to access that. So it would take some of the administrative burden off of your staff.
It would, absolutely. It absolutely would.
Yeah.
Well, I think remembering what we learned from other states that implement paid family leave programs, that there was really this decision that businesses that already had paid family leave could make, right? Like they could decide, all right, well, our paid family leave and medical program or policy is more generous than what the state is going to offer. And they're like, well, hey, we're going to stick with what we're already offering, right? And then they keep their policy. But if they decide, hey, I really want to avoid a lot of the headache of this administration, this is actually going to save us quite a bit of money. Maybe the state policy is more generous than what we were offering or very comparable. It just seemingly helps make sure that we're not taking away leave from people in programs that really like the leave that they have and have it built into their system, and it's a very important part for their workforce. This is just one that it's complementary.
That's a good point. So businesses who have, like yours, could opt to do it or to not. If it was better than the state-run plan.
I remember that being one of the only things or issues to be debated, right, would be if you were offering a leave program.
You already had it like you all did.
That was maybe say much less than the states. Sometimes the state will actually enforce you to increase your quality of your program. Like you wouldn't be able to say, oh, you can only take 4 weeks off if your employees are paying
so
in.
So the state plan becomes like a benchmark.
It's a benchmark, exactly.
And then you would be.
So that way we're not making employees pay into a program and then not accessing the same level of benefits that other workers are, because it is very and I would say another thing another factor that was very interesting for me to learn, that I helped conceptualize paid leave and its feasibility, was the idea that there are different wage replacements for for where you are in the income bracket. Because I think a lot of times you could think like, okay, well, if we have paid family leave and you got some person making $250,000 a year compared to someone making $725 an hour, are we replacing 100% of both their weekly wages? No. The general response is, and we figure this out through the legislative process, but a lot of it is, if you make that 80 percentile, 90 percentile highest income earner, you maybe only receive 50%, 45% of your weekly, typical pay, versus a lower income worker can make 90% or higher of their wage replacement. Because again, if you paid a $7.25 an hour worker half of their weekly wage and asked them to live off that, nice try.
Yeah.
So that I highlight that. I don't know if that makes it more confusing or if that helps kind of.
I think you explained it really well. That graduated because it's more significant for the lower wage earners, and a kudos to Hutch for being able to offer 100%. That is, and I've heard. I've been working with families for over 20 years, mostly around helping with breastfeeding. And I'll never forget the phone call I got from a mom who was forced to leave as soon as she revealed to her employer that she was pregnant, because she worked at a manufacturing plant, and they said because there was the potential for toxic fumes for where she worked, that she had to go out on maternity leave or pregnancy leave, and she got 40% pay, short-term disability, right? But to be forced and to say you don't even have a choice, you have to go out on 40% pay the moment we find out you're pregnant.
Wow.
Yeah, how heartbreaking. Yeah, you can't afford to live on 40%. Yeah.
So throughout this discussion, we've talked a lot about paid family and medical leave, what it is, what it isn't, how you qualify, how you don't qualify, all the scenarios you can get into of like why it's super important. But we haven't really touched on like any arguments against paid family and medical leave. Have any of you heard any arguments, or rather, if they're not arguments, then any concerns that we haven't touched on yet?
I think I shared the one from employers thinking everybody's going to be out the door. Nobody's going to be coming to work. Everybody's going to be out on leave. And we know that that's simply not true. People don't take more leave because they're able to get it paid. I think the other thing that I have heard is from employees who are not thinking of having a family and can't imagine a scenario in which they would need this benefit. Why should I have to pay into this pool, this premium, in which I'm not going to ever have to pay? I'm never going to be able to, I can't imagine ever having to draw it out. Now, we know that they can't foresee their own illnesses, that may be coming down the road, that there could be something like that, or of a family member. But I would say, first of all, the premiums are going to be extremely, extremely low. Anywhere from a few dollars a month, depending on your wage, up to maybe $10 a month. And I kind of compare it to automobile insurance. I don't know about you all, but it's been a long time since I've had a car crash or a need for my automobile insurance, but yet I still pay into this pool, so I have it in the rare instance that I need it, and then other people are able to apply to it too. And because the fact that we all pay into it, it's far cheaper for people when they need it. So I think that then it kind of makes sense. You're like, okay, there may be a slim chance I'm going to be in a car crash. I'm going to need a repair on my car. There's also a slim chance I may have a diagnosis of something that I'm going to need an extended time away from work. So yeah, I'll pay in.
It's interesting you use the car insurance example, because I love that, because folks already associate car wrecks as one of those things that we just have to deal with, but maybe you avoid it.
Yeah.
Whereas many of the instances that you could be faced with where you could use paid family leave, it's a much higher chance that you get that you experience any of those situations.
You must be a good driver, Logan.
Right. Don't look at my record.
Yeah. You're right.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I reference when you say what are the arguments that I've heard against paid family leave, looking back in my high school policy debate days in Kansas, which, if anyone isn't aware, policy debate in Kansas has a rich history. We're very strong. And there, I would say the arguments are very rooted in assumptions and fear, because when you really begin to interrogate any of them, they really don't hold a lot of weight. I think, when I've heard that this could be potentially perceived as a business mandate, or this idea that this would be antithetical to or out of alignment with what the business community really wants. Yet, when you look at the vast majority of businesses and you poll them on these questions, they answer the opposite. They say the different thing. If you talk about, to your point, that people are going to abuse paid family leave, use it way too much, we've got plenty of other states that prove otherwise, that it illustrates the opposite, that actually they struggle to get uptake sometimes because they're like, hey, we have this great paid family leave program, we want people to use it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, those are some of the biggest arguments that I've heard. I think there's also the concern of the dollar amount. I think when people just first statement of a statewide universal paid leave or medical program, you're like, whoa, that's going to be expensive. How much state general funds are we going to have to pay to fund this program, when the program includes its own financing mechanism, the contribution model of that pooled funding, and it's a self-contained model. We won't have to increase state general funds to pay for this. This is
So just to be clear, for the
Please,
people
do it.
that are listening, how much is coming out of state general funds to support a paid leave program?
a big fat zero, Brenda.
Zero.
Zero.
Okay, just want to make sure people in the back heard that.
I love it. Yeah.
All right.
Yep, Cero for our
Thanks.
Spanish-speaking friends. But
Yeah.
I think, but again, I would love anyone to reach out if they think they have some substantive arguments, because we want to talk about it. I think that's, at the end of the day, we are often so deeply entrenched in this issue as advocates, as people that wrestle with families and are helping them navigate this policy, or even with Hutch and having it be a real program where you're offering it every day and seeing these instances where families are using it. We often forget that there's a lot of folks who have never thought about this as a thing beyond just what an individual employer could offer. And so, it would be amazing if folks really wrestle with those questions that they have and then share it with us and share it with other leaders, because again, it aligns so much with our values and what we prioritize. So it'd be very frustrating when we let assumptions or fear dictate or prevent us from pursuing programs that truly, when looking at the logic part of it and the heart, they align.
Okay, I have an idea for the next session. We could do a call-in show,
Yeah.
right?
Call-in show.
And then
Whoa,
call-in show.
I love that.
And people from all over Kansas can call in
Yeah.
and ask the experts, is it true? What do you think? And
Actually,
then
I love that idea.
let's
Do
just
you want to
take
do it like a radio call-in show?
Yeah,
Yes.
let's do a radio call-in show, and
Yeah.
then we can just take all the questions and see what it's like. But lacking that, I do have a question for you. As an HR professional, and I'm really curious what your thoughts are on a state-run program, because you would be the bridge from your employees to then apply for the state-run program. What are some things that you think a state program should consider, that as an HR person from an administrative thing? What are some thoughts you have?
It needs to be accessible. So not only so a lot of the things that were like team member facing documents that we're writing, we're considering the grade level of a majority of the team members, or a fair sized demographic of our team members. So it needs to be accessible, whether it's at a grade level that people can read at,
Yes.
or in the language that they are most comfortable reading. And so the information needs to be easily found. And so they shouldn't have to go through all these bureaucratic hoops to cash in on their money. And then consider so the whole process, from how you get the information to how you submit a claim to how you receive your money. So all of that needs to be accessible to as many Kansans that would need it. And
Yeah.
so I think that would be the most important
So
thing.
easy entry point, easily accessible.
Yes.
Um,
It shouldn't be a long, 7-page application
Yeah.
where, and so
Yeah.
those types of things. And so
Yeah.
anyway, the like I said, just the information that tells them what it is, what they have access to, what their
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
rights are, should be very easily accessible
Great.
to everybody.
Okay, so noted. And what would make the life easier for the HR person?
I think the same. So, a lot of things that we're running into is making sure that we have, whether is somebody in our office can answer the questions, or we have a real life person at an 800 number. And so
Right.
it doesn't, so 800 numbers kind of get a bad rep, but they're not
Yeah,
not bad. So
yeah.
it's okay to use a call center.
Yeah.
But that call center should be, you should get a live person
Yeah.
that feels like there's somebody in Kansas. It should feel like you're talking to somebody on the
Right.
other side of the wall.
Yeah.
Is what the call center should feel like. And so our HR office shouldn't have to handle all of that administrative
Right.
work, as you said earlier.
Yeah.
But not a leave a message or send this email and then wait
Press
a week.
3 for an answer now.
Yes. So
Yeah.
anyway, but that would be helpful to our
Okay.
office too, is to have somebody where I know as the benefit manager, this is my person. If I have questions,
Right,
I have
right.
somebody. I have my go-to person.
Yeah,
or my
so like a
go-to team.
direct access
Yes.
for HR.
And so maybe that
Yeah.
wouldn't be who the team members reach out to, of course, but that's
Right.
who I would reach out to with
Yeah,
questions
nice.
and for assistance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that perspective because I
Yeah.
think it speaks to what we hear a lot about from other states. And when they talk about there's the advocacy part of fighting for paid leave when you are trying to create it as a law and a program, but then there's the implementation phase, and it's the, all right, y'all, we got to do this now. Who's in charge? Who do we go to? And the fact that in the structure of the contribution system, that pays for the administrative component as well. So, depending on what you put in there, you say, hey, well, y'all, we've maybe, in Kansas, there have been issues in the past sometimes with the Department of Labor, and usually being like with some technology issues. I think a lot about during COVID, and there was different programs. There was a lot of frustrations from pretty much everyone involved. The agency was frustrated because they didn't feel like they had the administrative capacity to handle what was going on. But then that affects residents, that affects people in the community where they're like, hey, you all said this program was here, but it's that part of as someone that grew up in like a small business with my dad and family, it's like that customer service aspect really does
it's
matter.
really important.
And
Yeah.
especially given this is something that everybody would be paying into, making that human element to it. And other states have succeeded. And I think everything you were saying, I was thinking about other states where
Right.
I'd heard. I'm like,
Yeah.
I remember them saying that. They've created personal,
I-
hotlines or people that could be like an agent to support.
And I remember one state that had in their policy implementation that the forms had to be in, and they listed languages.
Yes.
And if there were new languages, that there was an allowance for that. But just for the audience who may be getting a little nervous about the cost of all this, it's like hotlines and forms in 8 languages, and oh my gosh. Just remember that all of this is built into those premiums that everybody is paying in. And for those that are in the weeds on the finances, most states have taken a year to 2 years of payments to build up the administration and the fund before they start dispersing the funds. So there's this on-ramp of payments for a few years to build up the fund, to hire the employees that are going to run the fund, and usually those employees are housed within a current state agency. And so in Kansas, it might make most sense for that to be Department of Labor, but we will see. But most states, it's housed within, and it's the additional employees and training to stand this up. And some states have actually found that they started paying out benefits earlier because their pay-in rates, like the economics of it, they were able to start paying benefits after the first year. And weren't there a couple of states, Logan, that we heard about at that meeting where they did use general funds to start making payments on day one, and then it was a loan from general funds, and then as the funds came in from the payroll premiums, it repaid the general funds.
The times that states, yes, to answer your question, there were times where states had put very minimal amounts of initial investments, either to get the program paying out because they know, hey, we're going to be having folks contribute back so we can pay ourselves back out of that fund, out of that new revenue source from the paid family leave program. The only other state general fund, and I'm pretty sure that they paid for it with the contribution afterwards, but this also helps us get an idea of the total cost of a paid family leave program, is a lot of states do an actuarial study. So just not to get too in the weeds, but they do basically an accounting of, all right, based on the policy structure, you all are wanting to do 12 weeks of leave at this wage replacement rate at this different variable. That study can give the state an understanding of, all right, how much estimated do we need to raise in revenue to pay for this? And, that is basically the foundation of everything. So to kind of get to that question or that fear that Brenda was trying to comfort, of say, hey, this sounds like it may be a lot, or, all this number, it's not like we're talking about a nebulous number that doesn't exist. As advocates within this paid family leave or paid leave for all Kansans coalition, we'll be working with our other community members and developing and refining this policy, creating some really strong estimates for how much it costs, because we got to have that whenever we're talking to community members, but especially policymakers. And so just to illustrate that there are definitive numbers.
There's some math ahead.
There's some math.
There's some math ahead.
Oh, goodness.
And that'll get down to the premium, right? Like how much is the employer contribution or the employee contribution and all of that. And thankfully, because we'll be the 17th state adopting this, we can look to what other states to kind of get a guesstimate of costs on all of this. So definitely some math ahead.
All right, now we're reaching the end. Parting with sweet sorrow, but it's okay.
Sweet sorrow.
You have my number and my email. I'm
Yeah.
not that hard to reach out to.
Random thoughts on paid leave, send to Pimpa. There we go.
I will respond with an emoji. But what is your personal argument for paid family and medical leave?
I think personally it's one of the rare policies that would move the needle on so many of the things that we care about. Economic development and stability, family health, physical, mental health. I think it's a rare policy that addresses so many of the things that Kansans care about.
I think it's important to do the right thing. And it's just, it feels like it's the right thing. It feels like it's, like I said earlier, like I want people to be picky about where they go to work. And so either they can choose from the small number of employers that offer this now, or they can choose from every employer in the state of Kansas that offers it. It's the right thing to do. So whether we allow those small number of employers to continue to do the right thing, or everybody joins in something that's just equitable for everybody, it just makes sense.
Following up both of y'all, I agree from a community development perspective, and someone that cares and is invested deeply in the health and the security, the growth of our state in so many different areas. I see this as a silver bullet policy that truly gets at the root of a lot of systemic challenges. But then morally, to kind of your point, Katie, I've thought about this a lot, where, when people say, when we go to heaven, what are you going to do? And a lot of it is spend time with your family. And that time to me is precious. That is something that must be defended. That is something that should be held in a regard. And whatever we can do to stand up for that value, we should. And especially when it tracks with logic, it tracks with the business case, it makes sense economically, socially, familially. Every angle I look at this problem, I end up with the same conclusion, that we should pass paid family leave.
Yep. Wow. Drop the mic.
Close. There are more opportunities to do so.
Okay.
what is your message for any policymakers or legislators who may oppose paid family medical leave passing in Kansas?
Call us. I mean, we would love to talk with you, or short of that, research the issue. Do some investigation and draw your own conclusions after doing some investigation. Because to what you said earlier, Logan, I think that a lot of the concerns have been addressed through the evidence in the other states that have implemented it.
I agree, and along those lines, we're not asking to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah.
The wheel's already made,
Yes.
and there's already numerous states out there that are using that wheel, and so let's figure out why it's working for them, figure out what's working, and let's
Bring the
do
wheel
it.
to
Let's
Kansas?
do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, because I've talked to many Kansas legislators, many policymakers, and I feel as if I have an understanding of their values and what they care about. And I think if they've truly understood, and like you said, Brenda, of if they really investigate this, if they really answer their fears, address those questions. Because when you do that and you find those real answers, I feel like there's so much connection to our values as Kansans around how much we care about family, how much we care about making sure businesses, and especially small businesses, have a strong footing in comparison to their national competitors. And this idea that there's just so much that could be achieved with it. And I think that's one of the ideas, sometimes I think policymakers get a lot of requests, or they get a lot of ideas where folks are saying, hey, this is so magical, we should do this, this would be the best thing for Kansas. And I'm not trying to be exaggerative. I guess it's like that question of like, it feels like we're being dramatic, or as if we are saying painting a picture that is unrealistic. But look at these other states. Yeah. They can really speak to the reality of this. And I don't know, I had other things.
And I want to add on to my answer,
Yeah.
not just ask us, or maybe don't
Okay,
ask
please.
us, ask your constituents. Ask the people that elect you, because this is a bipartisan issue, and it polls across all demographics that this is a popular, paid family leave is a popular issue amongst individuals of all cultures, of all ages. And so ask your constituents what they want, and I think you might be surprised.
This is now your drop the mic moment. So what is your message to Kansans who want paid family medical leave for everyone in the state?
Join us. Call us, join us. Join paid leave for all Kansans. It's a statewide effort to get this in our state. And so please join us. We need to hear from people who are advocates for this issue, for people who have personal experience with the issue, whether that is having access to it or not having access to it. So please join the movement.
I think what I would just say is what I've said repeatedly is be picky. Be picky about what employer you choose. Be picky about, so I'm raising my kids to be picky about what employers they choose, and hopefully and have those expectations, and have just assume that it's going to be, not assume, but make that an expectation. And so once we continue to do that, then it'll just become normal. And so allow it to become a normal part of your job seeking experience. And so then, while the experts are working on, sometimes sometimes the everyday people feel like we can't really control what the policymakers are doing, but this is a way to do it. It's just have a high expectation and expect this to happen. Expect employers to have this protection for you. So just have, be picky.
Yeah. Well, and there's times when I love that idea of being picky, because I think a lot of people have viewed their relationship with Kansas as kind of being picky, in the sense of like, I either don't want to leave this state because I'm picky about where I want to live, so I want to stay comfortable and I want my Kansas community, or they're like, I'm very picky, I want more elsewhere. And this idea that policy and advocacy really is this representation of our values. It's representation of what is our expectation to be in community with one another. What do I wish that my neighbor had access to, that I want access to? Do I care about being, spending time with my family in their times of need? Do I want my neighbor to also have that same thing? That's us getting to be picky, but it's not like, I think picky makes it sound a little bit like it's almost individualized, or if it's not something that feels like it's rooted in, a lot of shared values. So I would echo Brenda and ask folks, to expect more. Like, it's almost expect, it's this idea that for me, I think there a lot of times we expect too little. We suffer, we deal, we just, we're like, hey, as an individual, I'll sacrifice, I'll figure out whatever I need to do at whatever cost. But yet, when we're all individually doing that, sometimes we miss out often on these other larger opportunities for us to connect with other people in our community. Be like, hey, don't you value this? Don't you value this? Oh, is there a way that we could make this happen together? And maybe it takes time, it takes energy, it takes involvement. So I think, you being involved, encouraging residents to join paidleaveks.org is the website for the Kansas Paid Leave Coalition. There's a portal on there for folks to share their stories, so you can talk about the instances where maybe you had leave or maybe you didn't have leave. It's all really valuable because we have to hear stories about where folks made it work and how wonderful that was, how important and valuable it was for their family, but then also the stories where it didn't. And legislators need to hear that, and leaders need to, because right now, when it feels like it's a pie in the sky idea, folks maybe won't act on it. But the more times that legislators hear this idea coming from their constituents, they hear about it coming from residents, small business folks are like, hey, I want this. Chambers, hey, I want this. The more folks that say that, it becomes really dang real. It's no longer this pie in the sky deal.
Right.
And I just thought of a beautiful combination of both approaches, the community organizing piece and the individual demand to their employers is, if the individuals are telling employers, are you offering paid leave as part of your employee benefit package? And they're like, well, no, we're not. And then along comes a campaign. Those small businesses or employers may go to the legislator and say, this is something I'm hearing about and I'm not able to do. Would you please do it? Take care of this. So this increasing demand is Katie's approach, really marries beautifully with this idea of, and here's the state's solution.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
I agree.
Yeah.
I guess my only message is you're never going to regret gathering all those memories, right? Like, I have 3 younger brothers, and I remember every day I would come home from school with all 3 of them. I will never tell it to them in person, so that's why you have to listen to it through a podcast. Of just like the sheer amount of joy I got, like coming home from elementary school and like, oh, I can see my brother today, right? And I think about that of like, that's what you want. You want to be able to have not just those times where you leave the house, come back, and you get those smiles when you come back, but you want them the entire time you're in the house, right? You want those memories when you're with your grandparents when they're doing well and when they're on their bedside. You want those memories when you're cooking in the kitchen, when you're cleaning up in the kitchen, right? Like, life happens really, really fast. You want that time, and I want you to have that time.
Well said.
I think a lot of people say you can't put a price on that time,
Yeah.
but you can.
There you go.
There you go. We may have to do some